let's see. I got my microphone, check. Got my clicker, check. And got my pruning shears, check. All right. Usual, got all my necessary things for a Sunday message. So we'll come back to that. Again, here we are for our first ever 9:30 service. And I just want to welcome you. And I also want to welcome anyone who might have not gotten the memo that we're changing to 2 services, so you're walking in right now thinking that you're actually at the beginning of service. I want to welcome any of you as well. I didn't see anyone, but I just wanted to put that out there. But today, in many ways, is the culmination of this series, Growing Pains, that we've been in. It's not the finale just yet, but it is in many ways what we've been building towards, because, from the beginning, we've been talking about how in life, when we grow, when we take leaps of faith, when we shift, when we evolve, there's always some discomfort, always some pain, always some change involved, right? And this is true not just in our individual stories, but as a community, right? We're in the middle of this shift right now where we're evolving into this next stage, and it involves some change. It today feels and looks a little different, right? I was feeling it all day, just the excitement, some nervous energy, but just, what is it going to be like? And I remember planning this out, right, thinking and realizing that we were going to need to move to 2 services. And I remember, pretty quickly this idea of growing pains came up for me. And with that came this other image for me, and that is that of pruning, which again explains the pruning shears, hopefully. And, gardening has been a part of this series from the beginning because, we look at the journey of plants and we look, just as we saw in that intro video, plants have all kinds of different pains that they go through just to grow and survive and eventually thrive. Right? So if we're going to talk about growth, then of course we're going to reference the growth that we see all around us in the natural world, right? And when I think about gardening, I think about my grandmother, who, I shared with many of you, just a few weeks ago, I shared how my grandmother had just recently passed away, and so many of you have been so encouraging and kind and really lovely in terms of just how you've shared kind words and been really warm about that loss in my life. But my grandmother was where I first got introduced to all these different concepts around gardening, because she had this amazing, elaborate garden. So a lot of my earliest memories of her were watching her in the garden. And one of the things that I saw her do was I saw her prune. Now, this is not my grandmother. This is just a dramatic recreation of pruning, okay? But I saw my grandmother engage in pruning of plants. And as a kid, my kid brain could not understand, why are you cutting away healthy branches, right? But as an adult, now I can look back and now I can understand there was a whole lot more going on there than what I could see at the time. Now, I'm being honest, most of what I understand about pruning now as an adult still came to me in the last 2 weeks as I was doing research for this, right? I'm not going to pretend like I actually know, but here's what I've learned in my foray into pruning. Pruning is about creating balance in a plant, because a plant has a limited amount of root power. There's only so much energy and resources and nutrients that it can draw in from the roots. And so that needs to balance the demand that is being drawn upon the plant from the branches. So there needs to be this balance of what's going on underneath the surface and above the surface. So when you prune a plant, you are reducing that load on a plant. You are essentially reshaping the plant into the direction that you want it to grow. You are in this relationship with the plant. You're communicating to it. You're telling it, hey, this is how I think you ought to grow. And I imagine for many gardeners, like my grandmother, this is a very intuitive process. It's not something that needed to be overthought or all the science needed to be understood, but there is this intuition, right, in communicating with the plant. But of course, looking at something like pruning, from the external point of view, there is this sacrifice or there is this loss happening for the sake of the overall well-being of the plant. And I wonder for us, right? I wonder for you, if you could think of any experience you might have had, maybe a season of life, where on the surface it looked like you were letting go. On the surface it looked like you were scaling back or trimming, and yet in the bigger picture, it was about the overall well-being, right? It was about looking at your life as a larger thing that needs tending to, finding balance. And certainly, if you look around this room, you can see something similar happening. That just in terms of the experience of us all being together right now, it feels as though things have scaled back a little bit, right? There's just less of us here at one time than there was last week and for the rest of summer, right? And so we're in this transition where in many ways it's as if we're in a pruning moment. And the thing about pruning is that on the surface, right, when you look at pruning just on the surface level, it seems as though it's almost this sharp, even violent act. Like I would not want to be on the business end of these. Like I hope no one's nightmares are being, rekindled, but I would not want to be on the business end of one of these pruning shears. Now I have to be honest. I borrowed these from Olivia, my partner, because she has all the gear in the family. Okay, so, but I had to bring these because just physically, and I remember I put these in my laptop bag today to come here, and I was like, I'm afraid that they're gonna like cut something in there, right? These are intense, right? They're sharp. And they almost have a sense of danger to them. And so certainly you take them to a plant and it's an intense act, but it's also on behalf of a larger vision of health, of growth, of life for the plant. And so in many ways, we're in the process of reshaping Aldea into something that is going to have more potential for life and growth and well-being down the road. But maybe even more importantly, I would ask you today, when you think about your life and your journey, where is it in your life that you may need to do some pruning? Or where in your life is some pruning already happening that maybe you didn't even initiate yourself? And where can you accept and flow with what is happening instead of resist? Now, I'll tell you my first experience with pruning on an abstract level, more as a symbol, right? And I didn't know it at the time. But when I was 15 or 16, I had been just waiting and praying for the first signs of facial hair, right? I was just so eager for that moment, right? Maybe then I would finally be a man. And so around 15, 16, 17, I saw the beginnings of facial hair, but looking back, I would really just call it like peach fuzz plus. It was just a little bit more than some peach fuzz. But I was really excited because I had waited so long for it. And so unfortunately, it was still pretty patchy. It still wasn't anything to write home about. So I was faced with this difficult decision because people were telling me that if I were to shave, it would actually be good for the long-term growth, that it would come back fuller and thicker. And so I was thinking, okay, I could shave this, but at the same time, I don't want to lose this thing that I've waited so long for, right? And so I had to choose, do I let go of it now in terms of, actually investing in the long-term growth, or do I hold on to what I have? And often I made this kind of choice right down the middle because I literally had this patch in the middle that wouldn't grow. And so I said, well, I'm just going to shave that patch, which ended up making me look kind of like Wolverine. Except I don't want, not actually like Wolverine because, that would be good. But it was more like a Halloween attempt at Wolverine. But I had to decide, right? Do I let go or do I hold on? And these are the hard choices that you and I are faced with all the time. Do we prune? Do we not? And then it makes it especially difficult that we live in a society that is always telling us that more is better. Whereas a pruning perspective would say sometimes less is more. Sometimes less creates the opportunity for something better. We live in a society that says you can do it all and you should do it all, right? And pruning in many ways says, no, we cannot possibly do it all. But where we invest our energy, right, in the limited places that we can give ourselves to, that is what matters. And so while society has this more, take attitude, we actually can look at nature and see that there is balance and there is pruning all around us, right? Think about the season that we're in right now. Fall is nature's way of naturally pruning, right? Allowing some things to die so other things can be reborn. But here's what I find fascinating. When it comes to pruning, and especially how pruning shows up in our lives, I find that pruning is really a question of what we are giving ourselves to in our lives, right? Because how many of us know that there are the things that we do, right? There are the choices we make, the pursuits that are in front of us. So there are those things. But then there's also how much of ourselves that we give to those things. Like, how many of us know that you can say be in a relationship, but you could not be all in? Or you could have a job, and yet you could not really be giving yourself to that work. You're not really feeling passionate and immersed in it. You could take any area of our lives, and you could find that there is not just the choice to do something, but there is also the amount of life energy, the amount of emotional investment, how much we actually show up to something. And make no mistake, there is no moral judgment here about what you choose to do and how much you choose to give yourself to those things. The reality is simply that you will have a different experience of life. Whether or not you commit to life, right? You commit to a person, you commit to a place, you commit to a passion, you commit to a pursuit, or if you don't. But this is where I think it's really important and where I think pruning really comes in a powerful way. When we give ourselves to something, we are saying yes to that thing, and we are in many ways, we're saying no to other things at the very same time, right? Like when you say yes, like let's say someone invites you to go do something and you say yes, you are saying no to the other options you had that night. But the same is true of life, that when you say yes to something in life, you are also implicitly saying no to other things. And so when we make choices, we are in some ways saying, this is what's for me, and this is what's not for me. And I'm going to discern between the two. And the Buddha talks about how this is actually a very, very productive and fruitful way of living our lives, saying that whatever is not yours, let go of it. Whatever is not yours, right? Can we recognize that? Your letting go of it will be for your long-term happiness and benefit. Right? So can we have the eyes to recognize, okay, maybe this is for me, maybe this is not for me. Because here's the thing about our pursuits. Here's the thing about recognizing what's for us and what's not for us. It's definitely not true that you can only have one pursuit in your life, right? Many of you can do many different things, have many things that you've pursued, many things that have, filled up your life, right? So it's not that we can only do one thing in life. But we can't do everything. How many know that's true, right? We cannot do everything. And so there's this realization that comes along, maybe even an acceptance. The more that we start to allow our lives and our decisions and our choices and who we want to be to take shape, the more we also accept who we aren't going to be, right? We can sort of embrace, all right, this is who I've become, and this is what I'm letting go, and that's okay. I can accept that. I find myself very fortunate to have had, various things that I've been able to pursue in life, and yet it's also came with the realization of who I'm not going to be. As I get older, I've had to accept, the time has passed for me to become a professional combat juggler. It's probably just, it's not going to happen for me, and that's okay. I've made peace with it. I can enjoy watching it, I'm probably never going to enter into a hobby horse competition, and at this point, I haven't just worked on the athletics necessary for that, and that's okay. it's sad to accept, but I'm probably not going to enter into a competition where I slice a pretzel so evenly down the middle that each side needs to weigh exactly the same amount. Probably not going to, you'll see. See, it's too late for some of us, right? The level of work that we need to have done, to get there. But the thing is we've all probably can look at that and we've made peace with it, right? We made peace. We're okay not doing those things. But some of us have really had to make some hard decisions in life where we've had to let some things go that we actually really wanted to do, right? Maybe we let those things go so other things could arise in their place, or we're being called in different directions. And we know we can't just live pulled in a million different directions without being definitive, right? But some of us get stuck there. I know I've faced that, getting stuck, feeling like I'm pulled in the infinity of choices. But the reality of our lives is that our lives ultimately come down to how we filter what's for us and what's not for us. Because in some level, we come into this world and we have nearly infinite choices, infinite horizons. But what we don't have is infinite capacity, right? Infinite time, infinite resources, infinite energy. 3 years ago this week, I moved to Tucson to become the lead pastor here at Aldea. And in that moment for me, it was a yes to Aldea, right? It was a yes to Tucson. It was a yes to this community and this life path. And it was also a no to alternatives. It was a no to the other options in my life. Not only the options that I knew of at the time, but also a no to the unknown options, the things that would have arose in the past 3 years, right? And so when we say yes, friends, every time we say yes, that yes is built on 1,000 no's. Because anytime you take something on, you are saying, I'm doing this and I'm not doing that, right? Because this is how time works. And for those of us who have, continued to take on different pursuits in life, like maybe you're someone where you're like, okay, I remember when I said yes to that degree or yes to turning that hobby into a passion or even a business, right? When you said yes to those things, you realize I'm going to have to learn how to say no even more because I'm making room for putting energy towards this thing which really matters. And so I wonder for you, perhaps there's something in your life today that's asking you to say yes to it. That's calling you, that's saying, hey, I'm here. But maybe you're not quite ready to say no to the things that you would need to say no to in order to truly make that a yes. The image that comes up for me is like bowling with the bumpers on. And I don't know if there's any serious bowlers out there, but I know that that's sacrilegious to even mention the idea of bowling with the bumpers on. Anyone? Okay. No, there's no one who I'm offending right now. That's good. That's a relief. I kind of need to bowl with the bumpers on. I just am so terrible that it makes it more enjoyable. But the image that I have is of the bumpers. Really, it's this idea that in life, when we make choices, when we are decisive and we decide what to prune and what not to, in many ways the bumpers come on and we decide this is my lane, right? This is what's for me. And the more that we put the bumpers on, the more we are directing our energy, directing our life in the direction that we want to go. And we're saying, this is my lane, this is not my lane, right? So this might be the only place where you're actually encouraged to put the bumpers on, but don't worry, it's just a metaphor. But really the reality is that where we prune, right, where we're saying, this is for me, this is not for me, it's the same thing as putting the bumpers on. And I wonder for you where you might be being invited to prune, where you might be being invited to put the bumpers. Sometimes the bumpers are time. Sometimes you're like, I need to devote my Tuesday nights to this and not to that. That's a bumper, right? Where we put our energy, where we put our time, all of it matters. Now you might be here and you might be saying, okay, I hear what you're saying, but my friend Susie doesn't need to put on bumpers. My friend Susie has her job. She also has like a side gig, and she has like a huge circle of friends, and she does art on the side, and she travels all the time, and she has 5 kids. I don't know if anyone has Susie as a friend. I do have some bad news. You and I are not Susie. And I think Susie's probably full of crap, too. I have a different word on my notes. But but the reality is, friends, the truth is that we can't do it all. And maybe even more than that, we just can't do it all fully. And I know that we're here for lives of fully being in our bodies and fully experiencing what life has for us. And if we're going to do that, we can't do every single thing. It's like a song playing, and imagine a song where every instrument is just playing at full volume for the entirety of the song. It would sound pretty terrible, right? Well, in some ways, this is what white noise is. White noise is actually every frequency being played at exactly the same time, right? All frequencies are being played together, which means, it's good for maybe some of you who like to hear white noise while you're trying to sleep, but it's not really good for much else, right? Like, I don't think there's anyone out there going like, I wonder what the artist meant when they, made this one. Like, I wonder what they're, white noise is just, it's kind of just chaos, right? But the reality is, I believe that you and I are not meant to be white noise. I believe that you and I and our lives are much more like a song. And for our lives to be like a song, maybe we should think about taking on the role of the conductor, in that we know some things need to be silent while other things play. That music is just as much about the silence as it is about the sound. So are we willing to take on that role of our own lives? I remember 3 years ago when I first arrived at Aldea, I just wanted to do it all. I think that was part of my insecurities. I wanted to be everything for everyone. And so if anyone said, hey, we need this, or Aldea needs this, I would just say, okay, I got it. And then pretty quickly, I ended up overburdened and feeling like I was failing in all these different areas of my life. And then some of the very wise people around me, the people who counsel me on the leadership team, many of them gave me permission to say no. They gave me permission to delegate or ask for help. And in many ways, they were giving me permission to prune. And what this did is, in many ways, it clarified my priorities. It clarified what truly mattered. And here's the thing about priorities. I think this is really important. Just because something isn't a priority to you or to me doesn't mean that it's not important. It just might mean that there is someone out there for whom it is a yes, right? That some things can be a no for you and a yes for someone else. And that means that maybe they're better suited for that thing, for that task. And so when we say no for the things that aren't for us, it might change dramatically the way things flow in our lives. I know in that moment for me, it made me much happier. It made me feel more balanced. And ultimately, it brought a team around me of people who they had yeses where I had nos. We filled in each other's gaps. And then now, it's something where everyone wins. But this is really both the beautiful and challenging thing about life, is that we can only ever really do one thing at a time. How many of us know this, right? Multitasking. We've already before we've proven that multitasking is an illusion of the brain. It doesn't actually happen, right? We can only do one thing at a time, and there ultimately in our lives isn't time for everything. And so our life ends up becoming the sum of where we place our awareness and where we place our attention. And again, in the context of pruning, it's also about where we don't place our awareness and our attention. What we think of as our lived experience is actually a very, very small portion of all that's happening out in the world. Like sensory-wise, we have to filter out 99.9% of everything that's going on in the external world in order to be able to have an experience of reality. So what you and I call consciousness or reality, it's about 0.01% of all that's actually happening. But otherwise, we wouldn't be able to make sense of the noise. One of the founders of modern psychology, William James, says that my experience is what I agree to attend to. Only those items which I notice shape my mind. Friends, it's not a question of whether or not we are pruning reality all the time. It's more of a question of, are we being conscious about it? Are we being aware of the fact that we are always choosing what is in our focus? We are always making a choice by what we place our attention on. That we say yes by saying no. That we tune in to some things by tuning out others. This is how a radio works. All of the frequencies are out there in the world, but a radio hones in on one and it ignores the rest. This is why something like meditation can be such a powerful practice, is because we are essentially saying no to everything else but the awareness of the present moment. Right? And this can be really hard because you're having to say no to wandering thoughts, and you're having to say no to itches and all kinds of things if you're like me. But our minds are so accustomed to grasping for more, and this is where pruning comes into play. Right? So in essence, this idea of less, this idea of scaling back, from society's point of view, this can often feel like a failure. But in fact, when we are intentionally saying no, we are also saying yes. And this is what makes us the conductors of our lives. This is what makes us the gardeners of our lives. So I just want to leave you with a couple of ways of thinking about pruning, right? And how we are the ones responsible for pruning our own lives. And really what happens in pruning is very much what happens when we are intentional about the layout of our lives. And the first is this: pruning is about balance, right? Balance between the roots and the branches. And the reality is that you and I, we have limited energies. And so the question I would ask you is are the demands of your life and the energy supply that you have, are they matching, right? Is what you're trying to do and accomplish with your life matching the amount of energy that you are bringing in, right? Is the give and take of your life balanced? And if it's not, I would encourage you to ask yourself where you might need to prune. The second is pruning reduces waste, right? That there are things that are pulling energy away that don't need to be. And I wonder, for all of us, we all have things in our lives that are siphoning energy from us, and maybe they don't need to be there. Right? Are there relationships in your life that you might need to look at and say, hey, maybe this is pulling energy away from me, and maybe this isn't what I need anymore. Maybe there are responsibilities that you have agreed to that really, they aren't yours. It doesn't feel like a yes in your heart, and you're letting it pull energy. And certainly we all have this interesting relationship with the news and current events. And I'm not saying that we ought not be informed, but we might, many of us look at our lives and say that I'm giving so much of my energy to the news and to staying informed that maybe sometimes it takes more energy than it's giving, right? Can we be cognizant of that and reducing the waste? The third is pruning makes space in our lives. That often there's something new that might want to come into your life, but if there isn't space for it, if there isn't time, if there isn't energy, if there aren't resources, then I wonder if that thing might not show up, or it might not show up fully. When we prune, we look not just at the present, but at the future, at what might be yet to come into our lives. And the last thing is that pruning is an act of communication, right? And I want you to imagine for a second, your life is like this plant that you are caring for. Right? That you are in relationship with your life. That when you move in a certain direction and when you prune other directions, in many ways you are telling your life, you are communicating to your life, this is who I want to be. This is what I want to grow into. Right? And so can we take responsibility that every action that we take in many ways is communicating to our lives who we want to be, who we want to become. Everything we've talked about today is true in that we can initiate this, but it's also true in that life will do it for us. Sometimes it's not a choice that we make. Sometimes it's simply happening. And the encouragement that I want to give you today and that I need to hear myself is that whether or not we have initiated it or whether life has just busted out the pruning shears on its own, my encouragement is, may we not be afraid, right? May we not be afraid of the sharpness, because even though they are sharp, they are also life-giving. Even though they cut, they also restore. So here we are as a community, and we're in this phase and this step of our journey where we're making space for what's next. And all along the way, right, we're going to be listening. We are in communication with each other, right? We are all the plant, right? And so we're all listening to what's next. And as we continue this journey of 2 services. But my invitation for you, whether it's as you look at this community, as you look at your life, that we would take on this pruning perspective. May we recognize that every yes in our life is built on 1,000 no's. And may we recognize that even when we're facing the growing pains of letting something go, we are also inviting new life to come in. Because friends, a meaningful life isn't a life where we are able to do every last possible thing, but it's that the things that do matter to us, we are able to give ourselves to fully and with love.